Hey everyone, Wolf Lord Rho here. Today we end Astra Militarum week, and it's been a great ride, shining a light on the loyal men and women of the Guard. Of course, there's a million more amazing heroes and moments to discuss, so fear not, this is definitely not the end of the Militarum. But where better to end this week than with a look at Colonel Commissar Ibram Gaunt and the two sides of leadership. Spoiler warning to begin, the events we are discussing today are from the Warhammer 40k novel First and Only by Dan Abnett. As always, I really recommend you read the story for yourself first, as that's the best way to enjoy the lore for yourself. Not only that, we help to support the great Games Workshop and Black Library, because without them we don't have this amazing lore to talk about. I will put a link in the description as always. But with that said, let's just jump straight in. Now there was a million possibilities on where to end this week, but by far the biggest request I had was to discuss Gaunt's Ghosts. And well, why not? It's by far and away one of the most popular series in the Black Library range. And that's no surprise considering it took a bit of inspiration from the amazing Bernard Cornwell Sharpe novel series. And for those not from the UK who may not be familiar with Sharpe, boy did you miss out. It's safe to say it's probably more famous for its TV series based on the books, starring Sean Bean. And I have no shame in saying I spent many an hour charging around the garden playing Sharpe, fending off the enemy with my next door neighbour. I might just have to dust off my DVD box set this weekend. But I digress. Now Gaunt is a bit of a different take from your usual Commissar. Aside from the fact that he is promoted up the command structure, it's the fact that he is a very personable man to his troops. And not in the way that Caiaphas Cain likes to portray himself as. So they don't shoot him in the back. For Gaunt, it's because he genuinely believes in trusting his men. And this is really reflected in his character from the very beginning. And this character is perfectly displayed during the war upon the Forge World of Fortis Binary. As Trooper Kathran heads through the trenches into the officer's dugout, the difference is immediately noticeable. The wet, muddy ground turning to dry boards beneath his feet, books and charts lining the walls to the makeshift underground quarters, and the smell of coffee hits his nose. Kathran has come to deliver communiques to the Commissar, and Gaunt himself appears just as Kathran arrives. Breakfast is being served on the table, and this is a sight for sore eyes for a frontline trooper. Certainly a fair bit different to his offering of rations. But rather than being ushered out immediately upon his arrival, Gaunt actually invites him to stay for breakfast, which immediately is something completely unheard of for a Commissar to suggest to a guardsman. And again, admittedly, Gaunt does have the added burden of command as a Colonel Commissar. The fact remains he is a Commissar, and even with regimental leadership, I don't see many commanders of the Militarum inviting their men to join them for breakfast. It would have been deliver the communications, then back you go. By the Emperor, you've walked mud in all over the floor. But though obviously uncomfortable at first sitting at the table with the Commissar, Kathran soon changes his mind once he begins eating the best meal he's had in as long as he can remember, before remembering to hand over the communications he'd come here for in the first place. And that is when the shells begin to fall, The enemy was coming. Gaunt, immediately leaping to his feet, calls for the men to action, as Kathran dashes out of the Commissar's quarters back to the trenches beyond, and the carnage already befalling them. Explosions are racking the trenches as shells plummet from the sky. Guardsmen are confused and frantic. Kathran attempts a glimpse from the top of the trench to see the enemy lines, but can see nothing but the fog of war. If the enemy are advancing, they are blind to it. The sound of lasguns and screams now fills the air as the battle intensifies, and a shower of blood covers the guardsmen. Kathran cursed and wiped the sight lens of his lasgun clean of filth. Behind him he heard a shout, and a powerful voice that echoed along the traverses of the trench. He looked back to see Commissar Gaunt emerging from his dugout. Gaunt was dressed now in his full dress uniform and cap, the camo cloak of his adopted regiment swirling about his shoulders, his face a mask of bellowing rage. In one hand he held his bolt pistol, and in the other his chainsword, which whined and sang in the early morning air. In the name of Tanith, now they are on us, we must fight. Hold the line and hold your fire until they come over the mud wall. Kathran felt a rejoicing in his soul. The Commissar was with them, and they would succeed no matter the odds. This is the sign of a true leader of men. The sound of his voice, the sight of his commander entering into the war, filling his men with an unshakable resolve, cutting through the carnage and the madness, instilling the belief that as long as you follow this man, you will be victorious. In the barest split second, Gaunt has gone from an approachable, caring commander to a warrior without fear. Yet even the best commanders cannot stop the enemy fire. Then something closed down his world with a vibratory shock that blew mud up into the air and seemed to separate his spirit from his body. The section of trench had taken a direct hit. Dozens of men were dead. Kathran lay stunned in the broken line of duckboards and splattered mud. A hand grabbed him by the shoulder and hauled him up. Blinking, he looked up to see the face of Gaunt. Gaunt looked at him with a solemn, yet inspiring gaze. Sleeping after a good breakfast? The Commissar inquired of the bewildered trooper. No, sir. I... The crack of lasguns and needle lasers began to whip around them, from the armoured loopholes on the trench ahead. Gaunt wrenched Kathran back to his feet. I think the time has come, Gaunt said, and I'd like all of my brave men to be in the line with me when we advance. Spitting out grey mud, Kathran laughed. I'm with you, sir, he said, from Tanith to wherever we end up. Kathran heard the whine of Gaunt's chainsword as the Commissar leapt up the scaling ladder and yelled to his men. Men of Tanith, do you want to live forever? Their reply, loud and raucous, was lost in the barrage of shells. But Ibram Gaunt knew what they had said. Weapons blazing, Gaunt's ghosts went over the top and blasted their way towards glory, death, or whatever else awaited them in the smoke. Gaunt here figuratively and literally hauling his men off the ground, their spirit as well as their bodies. The hand hauling Kathran off the ground shakes his body back into motion, gets him back on his feet while his mind is still reeling. And the quip, sleeping after a good breakfast, shows the trooper he has no fear. He's laughing at the enemy, stemming the tremor of morale at the enemy attack and hardening it into that unshakable resolve. These are the moments that define commanders. These are the moments that make or break leaders of men. It's a masterclass of leadership, the small things that make up a good commander. In talking, the time has come to go over the top. He says, "I'd like all my brave men to be in the line with me." Again, subtly reaffirming, within Kathran's mind, you are a brave man. You are all brave men. And I am going over the top, advancing on the enemy, whether you are there or not. How could Kathran not follow this kind of man? And of course, ending with the classic, "Do you want to live forever?" I mean, I almost followed it up with a Rico's Roughnecks. But as Gaunt and his men advance through the mists of the battlefield, the High General watches from his many miles away, with his spotless uniform, pristine presentation, manicured fingers, and coffee in hand, inquiring who those ants are advancing on the enemy. The perfect comparison of leadership. One within the men, within the hell of war, his fate intertwined with theirs, win or lose. The other, completely distant, on every level, in complete and utter safety. And so completely uncaring, he refers to his own men as ants. Gaunt as like a certain Sharp, who was much maligned by his fellow officers for being raised from the ranks. Here so too is Gaunt, for being a commissar given command, two areas which should never be combined. And the general, after being informed just who these ants are, decides it's the perfect opportunity to use Gaunt and his men as a buffer. Gaunt and his ghosts will just have to advance. Orders given, the general slides back into his armchair, lighting a new cigar, and orders a new pot of coffee. It's tough to be in command. The two faces of leadership, Gaunt a man of the people, the general the high command, playing a game of strategy and numbers. Now of course both are needed, but there's only one you'd rather be beside when the shells begin to fall, and that is Commissar Gaunt. But as always guys, what do you think? Does Gaunt deserve the reputation he has received? And do you think there is a problem in giving a commissar regimental command? Why do you believe the other officers are just so opposed to it? And in Gaunt being a good leader of men, does that make him a poor commissar? As always guys, leave your thoughts in the comments below, I love to read them. Huge thank you to all my subscribers, your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. And if you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. And if you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too. But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.